Good. Hey everybody, welcome to In Air's Kitchen. This is the second live show this week. We were doing like 5 days a week for a long time there, and now we're slowing down that cadence to 2 a week. So if you missed it, on Monday we had a really delicious show, and then today we're doing iced coffee. Next week we're going to do the same thing, so we're going to have a Monday show and a Thursday show as well. We're doing iced coffee, but we're also going to do donuts, which is something that we would do at Clover when we had a roaster come in, and then we also we sell donuts at the Harvard Science Center. But today we're going to go through that recipe. I love donuts a lot. Everybody who knows me knows that. And so this is a recipe that was refined over a long period of time, and I think gets exactly what I'm looking for in a donut, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We're also going to do what's called the Japanese method for making iced coffee. So if you want to follow along at home, you're going to need some coffee. You're going to need something to grind the coffee with. And today we're going to use a blade grinder instead of the burr grinder. And then you're going to need some ice in a cup. So it's going to be pretty straightforward. If you have like a Melita or Kalita style cone filter, that's the approach we're going to be taking. So let's get started with the donuts. Clementine, I was hoping you might help me with that. Okay. Yeah. So we're gonna make donuts at home, which means you need a bunch of oil to fry the donuts in. I think I should add that to my list of ingredients here. You can see I've got a heavy cast iron pot. So this is going to be great for heating up the oil and maintaining that temperature when we throw the donuts in there to cook. So if you have whatever your heaviest pot is, that's what I would use. And we're just going to use the safflower oil, any oil that can handle a higher temperature. We're going to do 350 degrees, which isn't super hot, but you just don't want an oil that smokes at a low temperature. But it doesn't necessarily have to be safflower. You might use another type of oil, would probably work just fine for this recipe. Something pretty neutral in flavor. And we're going to need eggs, flour, sugar, buttermilk, baking soda, baking powder. We're going to use vanilla extract, cider vinegar, and butter. So a lot of pantry staples, like baking pantry staples, to make the donuts. These donuts we're making are a style of donut called Cider Doughnut. And cider donuts are donuts that are made in New England around cidering time, and people enjoy them with their apple cider. So they're a donut that is a cake donut, as opposed to a yeasted donut. So there's the world of donuts is 2 big categories. Hopefully most of you know that. Some of these donuts you eat are like really fluffy. Those are the yeasted donuts, and other donuts have a little more density, and those are the cake donuts. And we're gonna make that cake donut style. And in a cake donut, I really like to have like a tender crumb and a little bit of crunchiness on the outside. So I like that change in texture between the two, and we're going to get a really nice result with these. We don't have like a donut cutter, so I'm going to improvise and just use some things I have around the kitchen to cut our donuts. And you might have to do that at home unless you have like one of these specialized donut cutters, and they're actually surprisingly expensive. So, but we'll show you how to make donuts with some everyday objects. A lot of recipes I've seen for cider donuts put apple cider in the donuts, and I did a bunch of research early on when I was first doing these for Clover, because that wasn't what I thought cider donuts were, and I was curious. And from what I could tell looking at the history, they do not have cider in them. They're donuts that are served with cider. Like a tea cake would be served with tea, but it doesn't have tea in it. And so that's just, I think, a misconception. Maybe chefs were told, make a cider donut, and they thought, well, because it's called cider donut, I'll have to add cider into it. We do not have any apple cider in these donuts, and that's the way it's intended. It's just a cake donut with some nutmeg, and we have like a cinnamon nutmeg sugar that we'll toss in at the end. So let's get started with the donut. I have a really special guest today. We're going to have an interview with George Howell and talk to him a bunch about iced coffee. So what I'm thinking for this is we'll get started making up the donuts, and then we'll do the interview with George, and then we'll come back and make some iced coffee ourselves and finish off the donuts and wrap it up. I know there are already a bunch of questions, which are awesome, and keep the questions coming. What we'll do is gather up all those questions a little bit later in the hour. I'll break and go through and answer as many of them as I can. So starting out with the donuts, what we're going to do is we're going to cream butter and sugar. And so we've got the recipe up there. I will post it online. We have a website now that you can get to from the YouTube channel. You can go directly. It's called www.inairs.com, and it's got a really good interface for the recipes. So we'll put all of this there, but what we're going to need to do is put 4 tablespoons of butter. And if you didn't know this, these sticks have nice little lines in them. So 4 tablespoons is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 of these, which is half a stick of butter. So you want to get a knife and put that in blender. And we're going to put this in the KitchenAid mixer, and we're going to cream it in here. And this recipe, we really want the butter to be at room temperature. So this is something like, there's no shortcuts here. If you don't have butter at room temperature, you can use a microwave to get it there. But if you don't have a microwave, you really just need to be patient. There's a lot of time. I've tried so many different things to speed up warming butter to room temperature, and usually it ends up in like a puddle, and it's a bit messy. So you cannot make this recipe with cold butter. It must be room temperature. So half a stick of butter is what we're going to put in there. Next thing we're going to do is sugar. We have a full cup of sugar. I'm going to grab the cup measure. Might as well grab the teaspoon measure like that. Awesome. And so I'll go ahead with this. So this is just white sugar, and we're going to put a full cup of that in there. And this is similar to a lot of methods for making cake. So we're going to go ahead and cream the butter. And this is something, when I first started baking, I would never do this as long as you should. You really want the butter and the sugar to get to like a light, fluffy, creamy texture. And I think that when I was first starting to bake, I often didn't do this long enough. So we're going to let that go there. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to, in a separate bowl, we're going to mix some of our liquid ingredients here. So we need 2 eggs. You want to crack those guys here? And then we're going to need buttermilk. I'll get you a measure. So there's the buttermilk. We're going to need 2/3 of a cup of that. 2/3? Yep. Yes, that's awesome. And I'm just knocking this down from the sides here. It's something you will want to do periodically when you're using a mixer. Awesome. So we got 2/3 a cup of that. We're going to add some vanilla, a tablespoon of vanilla. That's vanilla extract. And awesome. We're going to add some cider vinegar as well. So we're going to want, this is the closest thing we're getting to apple cider. This is apple cider vinegar, and we're going to do 1 tablespoon of that.
In here?
Yep. Awesome. And am I leaving anything out? I think that's it. We could, that's it for now. So these are the liquid ingredients. And then what we're going to do is, now that the butter is really nicely creamed, and like I said, that goes longer than you think, I'm going to turn down the speed of the mixer, and I'm going to add about a half of this liquid in there, not all of it. And I'm going to let that start mixing. And then I'm going to stop for a second and do the same thing I was doing before and push down the sides. All right, now we're going to turn that guy on again. So we're going to let that go until it starts to get mixed in nicely, and then we're going to add the chocolate. second half of the liquid ingredients. And I'm just going to push down the sides one more time. Make sure we're getting all the sugar and butter and everything mixed in nicely there. So this is similar to making a cake. There's a lot of cakes that start out with creamy butter. And cookie recipes start out that way. So this is well mixed now, and now we're going to put together the dry ingredients. So we need 3 cups of flour. So the recipe calls for all-purpose flour. We don't have that. We just have some bread flour that we're going to use today. Should we put a little bit of fresh flour in there too?
Sure.
Okay.
How much do you want to do?
Maybe I'll do a cup of it. Does that sound good?
Okay.
So what we'll do is the recipe calls for 3 cups. You can use 3 cups of all-purpose flour. I have some really beautiful wheat berries from Up and Gill and in a grinder here. So I'm going to go ahead and use about a cup of freshly ground wheat. If you don't have fresh ground wheat, you can just use the white flour for all of it. Sorry, it's a little noisy. It's getting there though. So I just put this here so that we could make sure that the baking soda goes through and gets sifted in because we don't want any clumps or lumps of that. Usually when you use baking soda, baking powder, I think it's almost always a really good idea to sift it in with the flour. That way you don't get those like clumps. And the clumps are bad in 2 ways. One, it means that you didn't get as much reaction as you wanted. So you don't have the leavening effect you want, but it also means that you might bite into that and it doesn't usually taste that great. So here we have this fresh flour. You have 1 cup of this, and this has everything. It has all the bran on it and everything else, but it'll work really beautifully in this recipe. And now Clementine's adding some salt. So we've got the baking soda, baking powder both in there?
Yep.
And the salt. Awesome. All right. So here we have then all of the dry ingredients. And over here we have the wet ingredients, and we're just going to combine these now. So the baking soda will react with the cider vinegar, and also it'll react with the sourness of the buttermilk. So those things will all sort of neutralize one another. And so we're going to add this in, and we got the vanilla in as well, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Once you make this batter, you can chill this in the refrigerator, and it can hold for a little while. You can make these right away, but they do improve a little bit if you let it rest, because you want them to be sort of flaky. When you mix it like this to incorporate the wet ingredients, you're activating some of the gluten. And so by letting it rest a little bit or refrigerating it, you're going to give it a chance for that gluten to relax and become less tough. So this is the batter. So you can see I'm just incorporating it. I'm trying not to like beat it too hard, but I really want everything mixed in very evenly there. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to put it in on a tray. So if we want to put it in the refrigerator, we probably need to go and grab a sheet tray. And I'm going to grab a rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin, you can just use your hands to pat it down. It's pretty forgiving batter, and we want to get it. We want to get it to about somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch in thickness. Now we're going to put down a lot of flour underneath it, so it's like a very generous amount of flour, because you can see how sticky that dough is, and I don't want it to stick to this pan. And we go ahead now, put this down. Do you want to be the rolling pin roller on that?
Sure.
So we want to get it to about somewhere between 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch, which means that you won't roll it, it won't fill the whole sheet pan.
Yeah.
I'll give you a bunch of flour on that. So we're pretty generous with the flour because we don't want it to stick. And just starting from the middle and then maybe to come around this way. We're just trying to get it even. Nice job. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Maybe just a little bit there just to even that out. And when we cut this, so we'll just let this rest a little bit. And so if you didn't have a rolling pin, you could really just pat it out. It's pretty forgiving. And what we want is just to have a similar thickness throughout. And we're gonna let this rest. And when we come back to it, we're gonna cut this into the shapes of donuts. So I'm gonna give George Howell a call. We're gonna do that interview. Before I do that though, I'm just gonna show you one more thing. In case you're following along at home, you're going to want to heat some oil up. And so, because this takes a few minutes. Clem, could you grab that candy thermometer?
Oh yeah, sure.
So I'm gonna get my pot here, and I'm just gonna pour oil into it. When we cook the donuts, we're going to cook them on one side at a time, but we want them floating in the oil. So we need to have a good amount of oil in here. When we're done with this, we're gonna filter this oil and save it. And so next time I need to deep fry something, I can reuse this oil. I don't need to throw it away. And so you can see here, I've got, I don't know how well you can see, it's probably about this deep, which is totally adequate. It doesn't need to be like 6 inches deep or something. And I'm gonna turn my heat on, and the thermometer is gonna help me know, it's gonna help let me know when it's at the right temperature. So I wanna get this up to 350 degrees. You're just gonna wanna make sure that the thermometer is not getting the flame of the stove on it, and that it's far deep enough in the oil that it's getting a good measurement. So I'm gonna keep an eye on that thermometer as it gets closer and closer to 350. I wanna be careful with oil, because if it gets too hot, it can get to a point where it vaporizes or it flames up, and we don't want any of that excitement. So this is heating up now, which is great. I'm gonna let that go, and then we'll try to dial in George Howell, talk a little bit about iced coffee, and then when I come back, I'm going to make some iced coffee for you, talk about a method that I really love for iced coffee, then we'll drop some donuts in, and we'll have a little iced coffee and donuts.
So George, thanks for taking some time.
My pleasure.
Excited to talk to you about iced coffee. It's beautiful outside my house today. It's like, that couldn't be prettier out there. I know people are starting to think about iced coffee, and maybe even more than hot coffee, that's something people are used to getting out of their house. So I want to talk a little bit about how people might get their iced coffee fix at home. But I was wondering, and I was talking to you a little bit about this before, but maybe you could help us understand the broader context of iced coffee. I mean, how have people always been drinking iced coffee, or is that newer as historically?
No. We sold coffee at Coffee Connection, 1975 forward. We were selling iced coffee.
Yeah.
But it was an afterthought. It wasn't really a serious thing. Iced coffee, back in those days, few of us who were really into it were drinking ice. We were always drinking coffee, pretty much.
Okay.
And so iced coffee was typically the coffee that you had in your urn that went past the point, or at a certain point where you're going to turn it over, you put it in the fridge, you let it get cold, and that was iced coffee.
Okay.
Actually, quite similar in certain respects to cold brew these days.
Well, the first
I
version,
can't help but get a jab in.
yeah, I have some. This is my coffee left over from this morning, and you know I'm going to talk a little bit on the show about that being the laziest iced coffee, right? Is the coffee you didn't drink before and put it over ice.
Right.
So what's do you have any idea? I've read things that say people in the Northeast drink a lot more iced coffee than other parts of the country.
That's possible. Yeah, I mean, certainly in the summertime, it's a lot. Well, I don't know about the Midwest or whatever, but when I think of the West Coast,
Yeah.
normally, I mean, climate change is changing that, but normally it gets hotter and certainly more humid here by a long shot than it does in San Francisco.
Yeah.
You know, the area that I'm aware of. But yeah, we've seen iced coffee grow dramatically in the last few years.
And so even at your cafes, you sell a lot of iced coffee?
Yes, we do. We do. I wish I could tell you a percentage, but I don't have that off the top of my head.
And so
but it definitely is growing.
So do you feel like iced coffee is like if you were to, is iced coffee in your mind generally better or generally worse than hot coffee when you buy one?
Oh, yes. Up until very recently, iced coffee was not very good.
Yeah.
Really. And I think only in the last couple of years have we seen a real improvement. I mean, there was already improvement several years ago.
Yeah.
And that's the Japanese method.
Yeah.
Right? Which has been around for a long time, but only introduced to the West more recently.
Yeah.
But the problem to me with the Japanese method is that you would have to brew coffee much stronger.
That's right. Yeah.
Because then you're putting ice cubes to hot coffee, the dilution.
Yeah.
So you are adding very little hot water to a whole lot of coffee grounds.
Yeah.
And that meant that you were under extracting the coffee, inevitably.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so that would give you a more greenish, string beanish note.
Yeah.
In your drink, right? On occasion, you might hit it, and then it would be great, but otherwise, it kind of missed.
Yeah.
And more recently, there has been what's called the cold wave, which we put in our cafes, right? Where we brewed coffee at regular strength and then poured it into this machine, which sort of looked like a small air conditioner.
Mm-hmm.
And the coffee would be cooled down to 38 degrees Fahrenheit in a matter of 1 minute and 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And then you put the ice cubes in, the dilution was really slow.
Yeah.
And you had a properly brewed coffee that was right at the right temperature. And actually I'm brewing some hot coffee right now, and I'll show you in a moment.
Awesome. All right. And in your mind, that's the optimal iced coffee?
Yeah, because again, it's the right extraction.
Yeah.
And you have minimal dilution. So you can make the coffee just slightly stronger, get a really correct extraction exactly where you want it. And so all the sweetness comes through. And what's interesting with an iced coffee is that any sweetness that's in the coffee is magnified in the iced coffee.
Yeah.
That's always surprising to me, right? And then to my mind, you should be looking for a little bit of acidity in coffee. To say you don't want acidity in an iced coffee is to sort of say, yeah, I want my lemonade, but I don't want any acidity.
Mm-hmm.
It makes no sense at all. In practically any cold beverage you have some acidity because that's what quenches your thirst.
Yeah.
And gives sweetness to the coffee too, as long as there's enough sugars to balance out the acidity.
Yeah.
Right. So all those things are highly pleasurable and desirable.
Yeah.
So to just take it to the end, the best iced coffees pure without milk or anything are East African, generally speaking.
Okay.
Kenya and Ethiopian, geishas, for that matter, the variety geisha that's so well known, right, that people are looking for. Coffees that are more fruity, right, or floral, really sing in an iced coffee. Okay. Without a doubt.
Yeah.
So
that's really fun. And then you also have some cans of coffee there too. Or you want to show us
well, I just finished brewing.
Beautiful. All right.
So, and I'm gonna grab a spoon here and just move that around so it's all correct. and pour myself some coffee. I see my granddaughter put a heart on top of this thing. Let's see here, and yep, and I have a cool glass. Actually, no, I'm going to do it here. That's right. So I'm going to pour this is totally hot, just brewed.
Yeah.
And I pour it in this container.
Okay.
Which is part of the package. This is the Cool Wave.
Okay.
And I'm going to fill it to the top of that blue line, which just gives you 16 ounces of coffee, right?
Yeah.
So in it goes. And we're almost there. Bingo to that. And then out of my freezer, you'll see me disappear for a second here. Whoops. Let's see, here it is. And I'll close this up. All right, I'm back. Here you have this, which is 90 plus little rods that have water in them, about 2/3 of the way. All right, pure water, very clean in there. And so the hot coffee moves in between all these rods and therefore cools very rapidly. So I add this in. I just drop this in. You hear the crunch?
Yeah, yeah.
Like ice cubes going, right? And this thing is cooling, and it'll take about a minute to a minute and a half.
Okay.
To come down to about 38 degrees.
Yep.
And then I can add some ice cubes. Whoops. And my daughter left, so I forgot the ice cubes. Darn. Anyway, I always suggest adding ice cubes.
Yeah.
Some people will say, oh, 38's enough, and they'll drink it that way. Ice cubes add more ice.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that with iced coffee, it's a little bit like a whiskey where you add a little bit of water and the whiskey opens up.
Yeah.
And it gets a little sweeter. The same thing with an iced coffee.
Yeah.
So your first few sips can be a little bit closed.
Yeah.
And then it just sweetens
Yeah.
a lot, right?
Yeah.
In the body. So that's what you're after, right? So ice cubes are not a bad idea. It's good to add it to it.
Yeah.
Right? In the meanwhile, while I'm waiting for that to cool, so that's what you're talking about. These days, there is iced coffee that is brewed in the same manner, only using this huge machine that looks like an air conditioner.
Yeah.
I bet you it is to some degree. A giant air conditioner for a large building.
Yeah.
And the coffee is brewed perfectly and then goes right through that, refrigerated and canned on the spot.
So for a lot of people they're used to seeing cold brew in cans, but what you're
Yeah.
describing is a different method, right?
This is hot brewed.
Yeah.
So you get all the real flavors that are developed chemically from the hot water and the coffee. It's a completely different beverage than cold brew. Cold brew misses a lot of the things that bring out unique flavors. The terroir is non-existent in a cold brew, plain and simple. And even some of the varietal flavor notes are greatly diminished.
Yeah.
So this brings it all out. And so we got we have an Ethiopian like this, blue, and Monte Carlos.
All
This
right.
is the second one, believe it or not.
And would you open that up and just drink it from the can, or would you pour it
Yes.
over ice?
Both ways.
Yeah.
I would prefer it over ice, but this is really cold, and I've just served it like that to people, and they really do blow their minds.
Yeah.
The Monte Carlos is really a coffee, very full-bodied,
Yeah.
right, and rich. The Nanochala, I think it's going to be Gaduba now, from Ethiopia. That is more floral.
Yeah.
And higher but very pleasant notes. People are afraid of what I call a razor saw acidity.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's none of that here.
Yeah.
These are very smooth and sweet, like a super ripe strawberry. There's nothing harsh about it at all.
Yeah.
And it's what you're looking for. So anyway, we don't carry it on our website. This is something where you go to www.elementalbeverage.
Okay.
Elementalbeverage.co. There's no M at the end of it. I don't know why.
Okay.
But anyway, those are the latest. So, and that's where you can get these.
Got it.
As well as other types as well. But Monte Carlos, there you go.
And so you talked a little bit about controlling the brew strength, and you talked and that I think should make sense to most people why that matters. and you talked a little bit about making sure you're brewing it in a manner that brings out flavor. Why do you need to cool it quickly? Why does that matter?
Because chemically the coffee is changing as we speak, right? And over 20 to 30 minutes, it is losing its complexity and certain flavor notes, and it's getting sort of thicker, murkier with every 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. We dump our coffee at George Howell Coffee within 30 minutes.
Yeah.
No matter how much is there, it's gone, right? Because it'll still be a decent coffee, but it loses the particular thing that makes it special and from a single origin.
Yeah. More
and more. Until about 45, 50 minutes, and now it's getting that cooked flavor.
Yeah.
That is just really awful. So with this way, you capture all the flavors then and there immediately.
Yeah.
Right.
And the last thing I want to ask you about cold brew.
Yeah.
So it's become very popular. We did cold brew a long time ago and then stopped doing it because the primary reason I thought I was feeling like it had too much caffeine in it, and then we've tried here and there, but we don't do it now at all at Clover. Well, we don't do any coffee, but when we're open, we don't do cold brew. Primarily at this point because we don't love the taste of it. I know this is something you've got passionate thoughts about. You want to share with people what you think about a cold brew and why?
Yeah, cold brew is a manufactured product as far as I'm concerned. It comes more from the direction of like a beer industry kind of thing, where you're the cook and you're making cold brew. I'm after really what drove me to coffee in the first place. These really nuanced flavor notes and translucencies that I get out of the coffee, which disappears completely with cold brew. Cold brew to me isn't sweet. It's a sourish beverage. I don't get much sugar from it. Instead, it's sourish, and I think cold brew, and you're starting to see this a lot, even by big third wave names that I won't name here, that are now having them in, supermarkets and stuff. And it's got milk and this and that. It's a flavored beverage, really, and I think that's where it's going more than a straight coffee.
Yeah.
But if you like black coffee and you really had the experience of what a black coffee can taste like, sweet and so on, you want it black as an iced coffee, not with anything added to it. And then you should be going to this new flash type brewing.
Yeah.
Like refrigeration.
I'm always sensitive to, with cold brew, I feel like there are a lot of tastes like papery or woody to me. Like
woody. Woody.
And it feels consistent. Like I can do a different cold brews, and they still have that same flavors as one another. They don't vary as much.
Exactly. Very generic.
Yeah.
Extremely generic. So to me, it's a boring drink. In one food mall, we've had to serve it because people come in and they're like, they've had so much advertising and everything else. That's what they go for. And of course, you can kind of understand it because the iced coffee wasn't that good up until very recently as well. In addition to actually that to produce iced coffee the right way, which is the Japanese way up until a couple of years ago, required time, effort, labor, big cost.
Yeah.
Cold brew is easy.
Yeah.
You do it elsewhere. It sits for 12 to 24 hours. You might have a little bit of a trick involved in it or whatever. But it's simplicity itself.
Yeah.
And the cost then to bottle it and so on is minimal. So absolutely, you want to make money? Sell cold brew, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not my thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm going to ask you about one more thing before I let you go. So last time we did coffee, we used a really nice burr grinder. Today, I'm going to demonstrate with this guy. And I'm lucky enough to have a really expensive grinder I get to use, but this is the entry level. It's a most cost-effective way to get into it. just quickly, I'm sure people would be curious. They're going to hear what I think about it in a few minutes, but they'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on using a grinder like this at home instead of a fancier grinder.
I think it's a lot better than getting it pre-ground. Let's put it that way. Right off the bat. I mean, that's way better. You're right. I think you're going to bring out how you want to shake it when you're grinding it and such.
Yeah.
I remember in 1974 when I drove from the West Coast with my 2 kids, the third on the way, and Lori, all the way to Boston. I brought with me exactly one of those rotary grinders.
Yeah.
And a French press.
Yeah.
And I'd make it every morning along the road, right?
Yeah.
Just order 35-cent hot coffee like for tea and pour it in and brew it.
Yeah.
And it worked fine for me back then. And it was very enjoyable, right? It would be great if people can go to a burr grinder at some point, but that's a great intermediate step. And I actually want to revisit that because one thing is the theory.
Yeah.
I wouldn't touch that because burr grinders are so much more accurate and whatever. Another one is let's actually do the taste test.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
interesting.
So that's really worth doing. And yes, there might be a difference, but again, it's loads better than getting stale ground coffee. Even if you go to a place, get it ground and take it home.
Yeah.
That coffee is dying every minute it's in its existence.
Yes. Yeah.
So by all means, and it is tricky, and every time you grind it, you get a slight variation because it's never quite the same, etc. But still, it's better than ground.
Yeah. Well, and if it's the best path to people drinking coffee at home, then I think they should embrace it.
It's less expensive. It's quick, and it's if the coffee's good and so on, and you get the correct proportions, right, and the right grind. It's going to be way better than any other way. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm very thankful for your time today, and I'm sure everybody else can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thank you so much, and we're going to be doing a lot to talk to people about how to buy your coffee online. We know how hard it is for you and others because all of the wholesale channel's gone right now, but we love what you guys are doing, and we're rooting for you.
Well, I think we'll be starting to open little bit by little bit. Newtonville probably the first one, but Godfrey and Boston Public Market, hopefully down the road, and you guys too.
We'll get there. We're working on it. All right.
You got it.
Thanks
Great.
again, George. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Bye.
All right. Cool.
I think so.
All right. So let's get to donuts. Blue, Blue came in. I think is excited to help put some donuts in. So we've got hot oil. Oh, you've got some questions you want to tell me? Okay, Blue's Mr. Question Man. So I know there's some questions building up. Shoot.
All right. First question: can you say something about reducing plastic? Do you transfer everything to glass?
Well, at home I'm not using plastic. At the restaurants, unfortunately, I think we're going to be going through a little period where there's more plastic, not less. I think that the COVID response is going to require, we step away from reusable stuff in the restaurants. At home, though, we use glass. I think if I didn't answer that question exactly the way you meant it, write something else. What's the next one?
What's your desert island coffee here?
Desert Island coffee. Like if I was stuck. Oh, this coffee I have today, Monte Carlos. I really like this one. It's chocolatey. It's sort of like I think what you'd expect with the coffee. It's really flavorful. This is the coffee we sell most of at Clover. I really like it a lot. But I also something I really love about coffee is tasting things that surprise me. Right before we shut down, we had a really beautiful coffee that tastes had a really strong taste reminiscent of the skin of a peach, and I loved that coffee. It was a lot of fun, and we have different coffees. Some of the coffees I really like are a little bit savory, sort of sweet and savory, but it's always fun to explore and try different kinds of things. Other questions?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on storing coffee in the freezer, long term versus short term?
Okay, storing coffee in the freezer is fantastic. Everybody who says you shouldn't put coffee in the freezer is wrong. It is a really, really great way to preserve coffee. So if you get a big bag of coffee or you don't go through your coffee quickly, I would strongly recommend you seal it and store it in the freezer. I have a lot of coffee in the freezer right now because I got a bunch of bags before we hold up in our house, but I've got it all in the freezer.
All right. Also, somebody also said, also, what about fridge versus cupboard?
What about refrigerator versus cupboard? Refrigerator's gonna be better. Generally, the colder you get it, the less volatiles you have leaving it. So the molecules that escape, we'll then generally call them volatiles, and they're like oils and other kinds of aromatic molecules that are pretty comfortable leaving the coffee bean. And so this is what causes this is part of what causes the change in the coffee bean as it ages and you lose a lot of the fun flavors, is that these volatile compounds have disappeared. There's some other things happening too. As you cool it, the colder you get, the less likely you are to lose those volatiles. So that's the benefit. A fridge is better than room temperature. Room temperature is better than something really warm, and the freezer is the best of all. Is that good? We got them all? Okay, cool. So over here we've got oil, and this is at 325. I'm just going to turn it up a little. It was above, and then I turned it down, and now it's a little bit low. So I'm going to get that back up to 350. You can see the needle's crawling pretty quickly right now. There we go, and we're going to have it right there. Now we're going to cut our donuts. So Blue, you can help with this part. So what we're going to do is, you can use any, if you don't have a donut cutter, which like I said, I don't have at home, you can use anything that's around. I'm going to use this cup here, and I'm going to put a little flour on the rim of the cup. That's going to keep the dough from sticking, and then I'm going to go ahead and just push that down through the dough, and that's gonna cut the dough. I'm going to put a little bit of flour on this egg cup and push that down through. And now I've got a donut hole right there, which we can also cook, and I have a little donut. We're going to go ahead and drop this guy in the oil, and I'm going to drop, so you can make a big one, Blue. I'm going to drop that donut hole in there too. And we're going to cook these for about 2 minutes on each side. So I'm going to cook it about 2 minutes, then I'm going to flip it to the other side. Then once it comes out of the hot oil, yeah, that would work great. Oh, you want to make it a little bigger than I did. Okay, I like your idea. That's cool. When it comes out of the oil, we're going to toss it in some sugar. And so what I like to do for this, I like to have some sugar. And this is going to adhere to the outside of that donut and be really yummy. We're going to add to that some nutmeg and some cinnamon. And I'm just realizing we were supposed to add nutmeg to the batter, and I'm not sure we did. I think we may have missed that ingredient, but this will be really yummy. So I'm adding some sugar, nutmeg, cinnamon, and I'm going to add one more thing to this, which is a little bit of salt. And I don't want it overpowering, but that will make this yummier. I'm just going to mix those all up, and this is my cinnamon, nutmeg, sugar. Now I'm going to take a peek at my donut here, and it's about 1.5 minutes in. And I'm just going to go ahead and flip that over, flip that hole over. So you can see it's getting a nice brown color. I don't want it to be too brown, and I don't want it to be undercooked either. My temperature of my oil has gotten too hot, so I just turned down my heat. And we're gonna give that another minute, 1.5 minutes on that side. Do you want to cut another one, Blue?
Sure.
They're looking pretty yummy. All right, so Blue found a bowl that's a little bit larger than the cup because he thought that this looked a little bit skimpy. So you can really use whatever you have on hand. If you do have biscuit cutters, those can work really well too. How did that work? That's pretty great. You want to go ahead and cut the middle of it out? All right. So we've got a slightly larger one here, and I'm just going to pick that up there and drop that in the oil. Now this first one, about ready to come out, and bring out. You can drop that hole in, Blue. Now the proportion of this is a little bit large and this is probably a little bit skinny. It's just a reflection of what I had to cut it with. And if you've got different size cutters at home, you're gonna have slightly different proportions. If you come see this one, Blue did a nice job, I think. I like the size of that. That's really nice. And you can see the first cooking on the bottom, it causes the baking soda, baking powder to, those bubbles to expand. And you can see you get some cracking and breaking on the top. I like that, that's really nice. I want to have that. And then when I flip it, all those little nooks and crannies are gonna get a little bit crunchy and create some of the texture that I'm looking for in the donut. Now these ones I took out first. These are slightly overcooked in my mind, like a little darker than I was aiming for. And that just has to do with that temperature of the oil. It got a little bit hot on us. And while it's still warm, I'm gonna toss it in this sugar mixture. And these are our first donuts. Do you want to get maybe get a platter or something we can put these on, Blue? And then I'm gonna come back to these guys and just turn that over. So that's cooking up much more where I want it to be. There we go. That's great, Blue. Nice job. So you can put the platter, and then what I'm gonna have, Blue, is if you want to continue to do donuts, I'm gonna get going on the coffees. That sound good?
Okay.
All right. And we just, we'll let them all cool a little bit before you put them in the sugar. If you put them right in the sugar, it's not as good of a result. So you really want to take them out, give them a second to cool, and then put them in the sugar. Let's see, those are probably
How long
another
should we
minute.
cook for?
You're going to want to do 2 minutes on the first side or so, 1.5 to 2 minutes, and then you're going to flip it and do another minute or two on the second side. I can set my phone over here for you as a, I think there's a little stopwatch thing I can set up on this. Okay, there you go. So you can use that to keep time, right? Yeah, and then, well, I'll help you. So when you put it in, this is always true of fryers, you don't want to drop it from high. You want to get pretty close to the oil. Because if you drop it from high, it'll make a splash. So get it really close, and then you make a lot less of a splash. And these are looking pretty good to me. So I'm going to take this one out. Take this one out. Now, I have a wooden counter, and the wooden counter just loves the oil. I mean, it just soaks it in, and it's really good for it. But if you had a different kind of counter and you didn't want all that oil on there, you could put a sheet pan there, you could put paper towels to absorb the oil. I've got the timer going, Blue, so when it's at about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes is when you're going to flip them, okay? All right, so while Blue's making those, I'm going to make some iced coffee. And I thought today I would use a blade grinder instead of the burr grinder. I'm afraid that, I know talking to George, his coffee sales, they picked up online, but nowhere near the loss that he has of wholesale. And talking to other specialty coffee, I know you're all just, as a population, we're not drinking as much high quality coffee as we did when restaurants and cafes and coffee shops were open. And that's a tough thing for folks who grow coffee, because the best growers make really beautiful special coffees. It costs a little bit more, and you don't get these coffees at Dunkin' Donuts. You don't get these coffees at Starbucks. And so if we're not supporting them with our dollars, we're going to have trouble expecting them to be there in the future. So I strongly encourage everybody, get some really beautiful coffee. The difference in price isn't that much. The impact is a lot. Somebody asked about organic coffee. Organic coffee, wonderful. A lot of the roasters we work with are not necessarily buying organic coffee. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But most of the growers they're working with are using really wonderful practices. So they have really good relationships, and if they are using chemicals, they're using them in a very restrained way. So one of the things I'm afraid may stay in the way of people getting really beautiful, high-quality coffees is fearing that you don't have all the right equipment at home. So I wanted to do this today with the lowest cost equipment I could think of. This grinder is like $20, $25 grinder. It works really well. I'm going to show you how to use it. And there's nothing wrong with making your coffee out of this. I've got a bag of George Howell's Monte Carlo coffee right here. And this coffee, it makes a really beautiful iced coffee. It's like got tones of chocolate and coffee notes. It's like what you'd expect with the coffee, but really broad in its flavor profile. So I'm going to, oops, I should have done something I didn't. I need to measure how much I'm putting in here. Now at home, I would recommend the first time you try this, you measure it, the weight, so you can get a sense. But then over time, you may develop you may just know how much to put in. Let it cool for a little while before you put it in there. So I've got here a scale, and I'm just going to put my coffee beans directly on here. I'm curious how close I'll be to what I'm aiming for with what I first put in there. So pretty close. I wanted 22 grams, and I was a little bit generous. So it looks like I had more like 24 grams or so in that initial pour. But I want to have 22 grams for the cup that I'm making. And then what I'm going to do with this, this has a little cord on it, and I'm going to come over here and plug it in. And there we go. And there's a little button here. Most blade grinders work sort of like this. It's going to make a little bit of noise. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grind for a minute. I'm listening for the sound. And as the sound changes, I'm going to shake it a little bit. And let it go again. I'm going to shake it a little bit. So I'm just sort of listening to it with my ears. And I'm shaking the grinder around. And for this iced coffee, I want to get to a pretty fine grind. And I'm just using my ears to help figure out where that right place is. And I'll show you what I'm aiming for. So this is the grind that we get to. It's a little more fine than if I was making hot coffee. And the method that we're doing here is called Japanese method. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put ice in a cup that I'm going to pour right over it. And so as George was mentioning, there's like a aging curve that that coffee can go through. It's why, like, if you have old coffee, it's been out for a while, it might not taste as great as some fresh coffee. People, it's why you want to make some fresh coffee. So what's happening is in that stage from when it's hot and fresh down to the place where it's room temperature, in that zone, you have a lot of aging activities. You have a lot of like chemistry happening that makes the coffee taste less delicious. And what we want to do is go through that zone as fast as possible. So we want to like flash freeze this coffee. And so what I have now is I have a cup, and in this case I have put 100 grams of ice in that cup, and I'm going to pour the coffee right onto that ice. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring that temperature of the coffee down really, really quickly, and that's going to help capture the best flavors of this coffee. So I'm going to knock that out of here. Oops. Okay, so I got all the coffee out of there, and I'm going to take my hot water, and this is going to be similar to what we did when we were doing hot coffee. If you watched that method, we're going to put about 2 tablespoons of water on the coffee initially. And this is called the bloom, and you can sort of see why. You can see it bubbling up. That's the carbon dioxide being released from the coffee grounds, and you can see it bubbling. You might have a little bit drip through, but the goal here is not to have a lot of water rush through. You're giving it like 20 or 30 seconds to hydrate, and then what will happen now is when I pour more water on there, I'll have more control. But with the hot coffee, the second stage we did after the bloom was bring the water all the way up, and we went full blast. This time, with this iced coffee, I'm going to control the rate of the brewing with the water I'm putting in, instead of controlling it by the size of the holes on this. So the way that's going to look is I'm going to put a bit of water on there, and I'm going to watch down here. And what I want is I want that stream to be a little bit like tick, 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 like a machine gun. I don't want it to be a steady stream of coffee coming out. And so I'm just looking for it to be like a quick sequence of drops. I don't want it to be too slow, but I don't want it to be too fast. If it gets to the place where it looks like a whole single stream, I'm going to back off on the rate. And the coffee now is falling right under the ice, which is bringing its temperature down really quickly. And if I did a good job with this, what I should be seeing is that the coffee is melting the ice. And I've chosen this amount of ice so that most, but not all of the ice will become melted, and it will become part of the coffee I'm going to drink in a minute here. So we're going to put 200 grams of water in there, and we're going to expect most of that ice to be most of that ice will be melted. I don't know if you can see that a little bit better there. We're still going. How are the donuts going, Blue?
Good. The temperature went down.
Okay, so we can just turn one more flame on there. Nice job. I'm gonna come back and hit this again. Okay, so I'm getting up to the place I was aiming for, and so as I said, I wanted to add about 200 grams of water to this. I'm not quite there. So if I lift this off, I can see what the weight is of the liquid in there. So right now we're at like 130 grams of water. A little bit more. I don't want that to stream too fast. I want it to be like tick, 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 staccato. And you can see that the ice is melting. It's not 100% melted, but it's pretty close. And we're getting pretty close to the target weight here.
Do you think it's been enough cooling?
Yes, now I think it is. All right, and so we're getting to a place that I'm feeling pretty happy. It's like the right amount of water's in there. So I've gotten to the dilution I was targeting. Now I'm gonna get a glass that I'm gonna serve it in. So I'm just getting some ice. All right, so at this point, this is cold to my hand. So there's just a little iceberg in there, but it's just melted the last ice. And I'm gonna go ahead but this whole thing feels cold. It doesn't feel hot. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna add that to my cup of ice. And that's my iced coffee. I'm gonna give that a taste. And it should have like some really nice sweetness. And this coffee in particular is like very chocolatey. It's really, really yummy. And because we timed it so that that ice was just melting, this is cold already. And then as we add it to this, we're going to bring that temperature down just a little bit further. Yeah, it's looking great. Awesome. And Blue is pumping out the donuts over here, which look awesome. How's that one doing? And so, looks like the oil temperature is getting to a really nice spot. This donut looks beautiful. So you can see some of these like crags I was talking about. I like having a little bit of crunchy crust. And we can break this guy open. All right, so I'm looking for this. I want it to be like spongy and soft on the inside. I want it to be a little bit crunchy on the outside. Do you want to take a little bite? It's really, really yummy. We're gonna have to give you some too, Brew. Well, babe.
Oh yeah.
So as I said, I really love donuts, and when they're warm, they're really, really good. This is what I like it to be, is like a little bit crunchy on the outside, a soft crumb. It's a cake donut, but it's not really dense and heavy. It's got a lightness to it, which is really, really great. And I can taste a little bit of that cinnamon and the nutmeg. Super yummy. Do we have any other questions we have to answer before we get going? Any other questions?
Which questions have you answered? I think. Okay, one question. For iced coffee, would you recommend washed or natural process?
Well, I think that you can. I think that a lot. I think when you ice the coffee, you bring out some of the sweetness, and so I think it's a really fun way to explore coffees that that are have some more interesting flavors and stuff. So I enjoy both, but I think natural process iced coffees are really delicious. And like George, I sort of like a little bit of acidity in the coffee, but this is all a point of taste, so what you like might be different. And you know, I saved this. This is my coffee from this morning that I didn't drink. So this was hot coffee, and this just sat all day. And I have to say, like, you know, I don't think there's anything terrible about making iced coffee out of this. After you're done in the morning, you have some leftover coffee, you put this in the refrigerator, or you can pour this over ice at this time of day. But that said, there is a really big difference between how this tastes and how that tastes. And this is like a lot more flavor. It's much more vibrant and exciting. But I would say the important thing is drink coffee, support people that do a really good job growing it and roasting it. We have a discount code for people if they want to order the Monte Carlos from George Howell, and I'd love as many people do that. As many people as can do that should. If you didn't get the email with that, you can sign up for our email list on the website, and we can help get that to you. It's really great to support people doing wonderful things, farms and other food suppliers in the Boston area. You got another question?
I missed the dilution for iced coffee.
Yeah, so we did 22 grams of coffee, 100 grams of ice, and then 100 grams of water onto that. And I'll post that recipe up so everybody can follow along as they like at home. And I think we're done for the day. Thank you everybody for joining. We're gonna be back Monday. I've got a special surprise episode on Monday, and then we'll do something fun on Thursday next week as well. So thank